fellow lovers of the liminal and the weird, and welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today I am going to be doing a deep dive into my favorite scary movie, and that is A Tale of Two Sisters, which was released in South Korea in 2003 and is directed and written by Jee-woon. It is based on a Korean folktale, just the concept at the very end of the film, and is part psychological thriller, part ghost story. We're going to go deep into it and figure out what it is all about. If you are interested in hearing about the production history and other interesting information about this film, I did do a review of it. You can find it a couple of videos before this one. It's a spoilerless review. Go check that one out before you watch this video. I am going to be spoiling the entire film in this video. If you haven't already seen it, go give it a watch. It is absolutely worth it. I cannot recommend it enough. If you don't mind spoilers or you've already seen it, watch on as we dissect this incredible film from South Korea in 2003. So I've already given my opinion on the pros and cons of this film in the earlier video, so give that a watch. For this, I am going to have to go through the film plot-wise as we go, but I am going to be discussing my ideas of what everything means as we go through. I'm going to make the plot point aspect of it kind of quick so that I can focus more on my interpretation. So let's jump into this. The movie starts in what I can only describe as a mental hospital, and we are introduced, although we don't know her name, to the character Soo-mi. And Soo-mi is being interviewed by a therapist. I have always understood this in the sense that the movie goes in chronological order through time until the end, when it goes back and reveals the story from the beginning. But I did watch an interpretation where somebody thought that this was her at the very end, and that this movie had bookends. I don't know. This scene of her in the hospital could go in a couple of different places, which we'll get into as we go on. But we open with Soo-mi in the hospital, and a therapist is talking to her. She does not respond, and he holds up a picture of her family and says, "Do you know who this is? This is your family." Soo-mi looks up out the window, and we are suddenly driving in a car. All spookiness leaves, and this beautiful guitar comes in. The soundtrack to this film is incredible. And we're driving through this lush landscape, and the car pulls up to this really wonderful old-looking Korean house, or might not be old. It's just, I think it is old. I think it's a very well-kept big house. So we pull up to this house, and the dad gets out, and we see Soo-mi get out of the car, followed by her sister, Soo-young. I'm going to mispronounce these names. For that, I apologize. My Korean is not good. And we see these two sisters get out of the car, and they run around the yard because they're so happy to be back. And then they go into the house, and already we can see that this film is being created by people with a really strong artistic vision. The bright, incredible exteriors of the house. I'm sorry, they run to the lake right before that. The two sisters, before they go in the house, they run to the lake. They have a little wharf right there by this little lake by their house, and they sit and together and put their feet in the water. And at one point, Soo-mi, the older sister, asks Soo-young to look at her palm, and she looks at her palm, and these dark music kind of plays. I always took that as a sign that Sumi understands a little bit about palm reading. Perhaps Soo-yeon's lifeline is non-existent, not there. The director doesn't tell us. And then they run back up to the house. And the bright exteriors is what I was trying to say earlier, give way to the gloominess of the house, and it is incredibly done. And it is here that we are given the introduction of the stepmother, and it is incredible. It is so well done, because she starts walking down this hallway, and she walks at this incredibly fast clip, and she starts blabbering about how happy she is to see these girls, and she's coming down this thin hallway, and there's very little light, and then suddenly she walks by a window and there's a ton of light, so it's darkness and then light and then back into darkness as she confronts these two girls. And I use the word confronts because they are obviously scared of her, and she is doing this weird, chipper, I'm so glad to see you speech that is terrifying, because it seems over the top and it doesn't seem sincere, and it seems like she's doing everything way too energetically and fast. This actress is killing it. It is so cool. And from then, we're kind of stuck in the gloom of this house. We do get to go outside every once in a while, maybe once or twice, but most of the time, the rest of this movie takes place in the gloom inside the house. And I want to just talk for a minute about how good this set is. There's greenish wallpaper in the dining room that is actually the background for the opening credits that is incredible. There's red, there's blue wallpaper that is constantly flashed between. So good, so amazing, very well done. And I'm going to say this right here because I'm going to forget if I don't. The only version of this that has ever been released in America is a DVD from Tartan Asia Extreme. And when this came out, I was so happy that it did. So thank you, Tartan Asia Extreme. But this movie deserves to be in 4K. This movie is so beautiful. We should at least have a Blu-ray release, and we don't. It's been released in tons of different countries all over the world, and not here. And it drives me up a wall. I don't know what's going on. On the Wikipedia page, it says that there was a company called, I think, Umbrella Pictures that was going to release it in 2023, but that didn't happen. It drives me nuts that I can't get a better quality version of this movie in the United States. It's just awful. I don't know what's going on, but I hope they fix it and are able to release this in Blu-ray or hopefully 4K in the future. It's my favorite horror film of all time, and I would love to buy some kind of incredible box set with a booklet and all that. And this is worthy of that, and unfortunately I can't, and it drives me nuts. Okay, so the setting is absolutely gorgeous, and it is used wonderfully. This is the movie that I would show to people to say, here's how you make an artistic slow burn horror film. It's incredible. It's so good. The girls are obviously not fans of their stepmother, and right away you can feel that tension. And it's here that the weirdness begins. Sumi, who is the older sister, goes into her room and starts to unpack. And she pulls out what looks like a journal or a diary and goes to put it into her drop front desk. And when she opens the desk, it's the journal or diary is already in there. So there's this weird moment of a doubled item. And it's a part that I think, because it's so beautifully done and such a slow burn horror movie, that I think people kind of miss. Not in the deep reads. People don't miss it in the deep reads. But on your first time through, you might not might just go past it because everything is so confusing. But it is incredibly creepy. And it happens to Sumi with the journal. And then we cut to the stepmom collecting the dad's clothing that she's just folded. And she walks into the room to put them on his bed. And they're already there. So she's holding this item, and there's this weird double of the item already on the bed, and it makes her mad, and she throws the doubled item in the trash can. And I'm watching thinking, why are items doubling? How mysterious, how cool, what an insane, enjoyable idea to present in this film. And it's subtle, but it's so cool. And that's really one of the things that I love about this film, is this subtlety that occurs over and over again. Next, we get the dad talking on the phone. We don't know who he's talking to, but he's saying stuff like, "I don't think if it will help that you come here, so just stay away, and I'll try to deal with it here, and we'll figure it out that way." He also lets this person on the phone know that he invited somebody named Sun Kyu over for dinner. And then we cut to dinner. And they're all sitting there. The father, the stepmom, and the two girls are sitting there eating. And it's a very kind of uncomfortable situation. And the stepmom tries to break this by speaking with the dad. And she says, "Oh, by the way, I invited Sung Kyu over for dinner," which is really strange because we already heard him say that on the phone. Yeah, she says, "I invited them over for dinner," and he looks at her like, okay. We realize, I believe it's this scene that we realize that that's her brother, the stepmother's brother. So their step-uncle, the two sisters' step-uncle. And the dad leaves, and they start fighting with the stepmom. And Sumi says, "I'm not going anywhere near that man." And she said, "That man is your uncle, so knock that off." And they have a fight, and Sumi runs off. And the stepmom looks at Soo-yeon, the younger sister, and says, "Aren't you going to follow her? You should follow your sister." And Soo-yeon gets up and leaves and follows her sister. But before he leaves, while they're having this little bit of a fight, the dad walks into the room and gives the stepmom medicine, some kind of pills. And the stepmom takes this medicine. The next scene is completely subtle and one of the creepiest, most insane scenes in the movie. And I don't know how to... Just trying to figure out this deep read, how to present this is incredibly difficult. Just as the movie itself is to unravel. So I'm just going to talk about it, and then when we get to the twists, we'll talk about them later. But the next scene is the stepmother getting ready for bed, and she's wiping off her lipstick and looking in the mirror, and you can see the bed behind her, and then she hears her husband coming. And jumps up, jumps in the bed, and pretends to be reading a book, and he comes in to the room. Later, we cut to them laying in the dark, and he's got his arm around her. They're spooning, basically, and he slides his arm up, and he's completely dressed in the same clothes he was wearing during the day, which is super weird. And he pulls his arm out, gets up, and goes to his office. I don't know if he's a medical professional or what he does, but he has this weird room that looks like a hospital room in the house, and he goes in there and sleeps and goes to sleep on a couch, and everything is really creepy, really slow, but again, number one, when you watch this movie, turn off the lights, turn the sound up really high so that you are affected by the atmosphere of this film, or if you don't let the atmosphere overwhelm you, you won't feel the creep. It'll just seem like people are walking around a weird house being weird, and it's so much more than that. The stepmom has birds that she loves, and this is a bit confusing, and I feel like, I don't know if this is a director mistake or what, but I feel like there's only one bird in the cage in the evening when we see the stepmom putting the thing over, and she's clucking at it affectionately, and she puts a thing over it so it'll go to sleep. And I feel like there's only one bird in the cage. A little bit after the dad wakes up, the stepmom wakes up and starts hearing noises that sound like kids running around the house, and she gets up. And then in Soo-yeon, the youngest sister's room, she's laying there and she starts hearing noises and gets creeped out, and then her door slowly opens and it creaks a lot, and suddenly this hand comes in holding the door. It's a tiny scare, but if you have the volume up and you're really paying attention to the movie, it's a very creepy scare. And eventually it scares Soo-yeon enough that she runs and jumps into bed with her sister, Soo-mi. And Soo-mi wakes up and is like, what's going on? And she said, there's people are coming into my room. And Soo-mi's like, okay, I'll go check it out. And she gets up and starts walking around, and we get this weird what goes on at night in this house. So the dad's sleeping in this weird medical room in the house, and the stepmom seems to be sitting on the couch watching static on the TV. Super weird. And Soo-mi goes into the fridge and gets a drink and smells something weird, and this is our first scare. Alright, my camera died, so I let that sit for a couple of days, and now I'm coming back to finish my discussion on this movie. So I think we left off with her finding a weird bloody package in the fridge. So she eventually tracks down, Sumi does, tracks down this smell, and it's coming from this weird package in the fridge, and she opens up the package, and it's this weird bloody piece of meat, and we don't know exactly what it is, but it's definitely a little spooky, a little creepy, and she gets blood on her hands while looking at this. And that, if the chronology of the movie is correct, is the first day and night that they spend back at the house. So we go to the next morning, and Soo-mi has a dream. And in that dream, we are given quite a bit of foreshadowing about what's to come, although really it's looking past. We see what looks like a hand under a piece of furniture, and somebody grabs somebody's arm, and there's blood on the arm, and really it's stuff that will make sense a little bit later. So after Soo-mi wakes up from the dream, we get one of the best, probably the best scare in the entire movie. It's absolutely incredible. She hears somebody crawling around at the bottom of her bed, and then she sees somebody crawling around at the bottom of her bed, and then this ghost stands up, and she has kind of a bent neck and is contorted very weird, and then this ghost steps up onto the bed, and Soo-mi is in terror as this ghost is standing above her and looks down, and there's blood trickling down the ghost's leg, and then a hand starts to come out, and she wakes up. Once she wakes up, she realizes that Soo-yeon has started her period, so she goes to her mom's room to get pads, and her mom, or the stepmom, wakes up, and she says, oh, Soo-yeon's got her period, and the stepmom says, that's weird, how could we get our periods on the same day? And then as Soo-mi is going up, she gets her period, and all three of these women are having their periods at the same time. After that, we cut to the porch, and the two sisters are sitting there whistling and talking about their mom. They look up at the birds, and this is a point of confusion for me, because when the bird's in the house, there's only one bird in the cage. But in this scene, there's two birds in the cage, and I'm not even sure it's the same cage. So I don't know if she has one bird in the house that she absolutely loves and two outside. I have no idea. But they talk about killing the birds. Soo-mi says we should kill him, and Soo-yeon says that they should let him free. At this point, the father tries to have a conversation with Soo-mi. The conversations between Soo-mi and the father are very weird, because he constantly seems confused by what she says, and he's constantly trying to ask her more questions to explain more of what's going on with her, because he just can't seem to figure out what is going on with her. I want to go quick through these plots, because I want to get to the point where we can look back and talk about them from the different perspective of the twist. So Sumi goes to a warehouse they have on their property, comes back with a bunch of their mom's old stuff. Soo-yeon's very interested in it. They find a bunch of pictures of their mom, and as they're looking through the pictures, they see the nurse that their father works with and has hired, which of course is the stepmom. So it seems like the dad not only invited this woman into their home to be a nurse, he also started an affair with her while he was still with their mother. Sumi notices bruises on Soo-yeon's arm and starts yelling at her that why didn't she tell her that the stepmom was doing this, blaming the stepmother. Soo-yeon doesn't ever say it's the stepmother. In fact, she eventually breaks free and screams, and you realize that the way Sumi was holding her arms, it could have been her that did those bruises and not the stepmom. And then we get to a conversation between Sumi and the stepmom, where the stepmom is accusing her of hurting Soo-yeon, and they're going back and forth and shaving, and you can hear this conversation going on. The fight ends, and the dad comes out, and Sumi is sitting in this kitchen area, and he once again tries to get her to explain what's going on, and she says, can't you see what's going on? And he says, no, please talk to me, and he's just trying to talk to her again. And that night, and I don't know if this is the second night, if this movie is chronological and isn't having time pass, then we are on the second night, which could make sense. Or a couple of nights could have passed, I don't know, but I think it's still the second night. The aunt and the uncle show up. Sumi, of course, refused to hang out with them, so Sumi and Soo-yeon aren't in this scene. It's the stepmom, the dad, and the stepmom's brother and sister. And she is very excited, obviously, to have her brother and sister-in-law at her house, and she's chatting with them, and she starts reminiscing about stories. And she tells these wild stories about a crazy man in the town and her brother's relationship to this crazy man. And it's such an uncomfortable scene, and it is done so well. When you watch this, you'll just be like, what is going on? Because she keeps bringing up these memories, and her brother just keeps staring at her really weird. And finally, she says, don't you remember all this? And he looks at her and says, I don't remember any of that. And she gets super confused and stares at him and is like, why don't you remember that? Are you crazy? And she accuses him of being insane, at which point her sister-in-law starts choking and then has kind of an epileptic fit, a seizure. And the father and the brother of the stepmother are getting her pills and trying to give her these pills, and they finally give her the pills, and the stepmom screams in terror at what went down. And then we cut to those two driving home, and she says, hey, I saw something weird under the sink. And it cuts to this really quick flash of this, what looks like a girl that's all burnt under the sink. And then the next scene, we get the next scare, and that's the stepmother looks under the sink, and there's nothing there, but as she's coming up, she sees a barrette, and she reaches for the barrette, and a hand comes out and grabs her wrist, and then she is confronted by the girl in the green dress. This scare was always very interesting to me. I feel like, and we talked about this already a little bit, I feel like that this movie could have been scarier at points. I feel like the director was so obsessed with the art and the storytelling that sometimes he left out the scares. And this scare, I don't quite understand how it connects to what happened in the house. And what I mean by that is the scare with the woman with the bent neck makes perfect sense later on because we see how it's connected. The girl under the sink that's burnt, I don't really understand. There's also one other part of this movie that I've never been able to figure out, and that is in the dream, the person putting the hand on the other person's arm, and they have like a cloth or something in their hand, and there's all this blood coming off the other person's arm. I will never understand those two things in this movie. I just can't figure it out. I know who the ghost is, who the little girl under the sink is. I know who it is, but it doesn't seem to make sense to me why she would be under the sink. I just don't get it, and why she would be burnt. It doesn't really make sense to me, and that is a small critique in my favorite horror movie. My really truly my number one horror movie. That is the smallest of critiques that I have for this movie. All right, we're coming to kind of a climax of the movie here. Not the climax, but a climax. I feel like this movie has two climaxes. I don't know if it's the same night or the next night. It's probably the same night. Yeah, because he's picking stuff up. So it's the same night. He's picking up broken dishes and stuff after the woman had the seizure. And he goes to put the bird to bed, and in the cage, the bird is dead. And he's very sad and goes out to bury the bird. So he leaves the house to go outside and bury this bird. And the stepmom sees this and goes to Soo-yeon, the younger sister's room, in a rage. And when she first walks in, she finds the pictures that they had found that included her. And Soo-yeon, it seems, has torn her out of all the pictures and colored over her face. So she gets more enraged, and she tells Soo-yeon to get up, and Soo-yeon doesn't want to get up. So she puts her knee on the bed to grab Soo-yeon and pull her up, and there's a crunch, and she pulls back the covers, and the bird is under the covers, and the bird is dead. And I really always liked this idea of the bird doubling, just like the diary did and just like the clothes did earlier. It's our third double, and I really think it is. I think this is what the director meant. The only mistake I think he made was that one scene on the patio. They had two birds in the cage, and I don't know if that's another bird cage. I think it's another bird cage. I don't know. But there's only one bird when they're in the house, and that one bird was crushed in the cage and is being buried by the dad, and now we see it being crushed in the movie, so it's doubled. There's two of it all of a sudden. This turns into a harrowing scene of insane abuse, and the wardrobe, which has been mentioned a lot. The dad Sumi keeps bringing up the wardrobe and how much Soo-yeon hates it. And the dad keeps saying, hey, we promised never to talk about the wardrobe. But the stepmom locks Soo-yeon into the wardrobe. And Soo-yeon is screaming, and it's all very, very sad. And at one point, the stepmom throws the pictures of her mother into the wardrobe with her and says, how do you feel looking at your dead mom's pictures? It's intense, and anybody that has dealt with the spiraling anger of abuse, this scene could be pretty heavy. But it's the peak of the problem with this household, this stepmother not able to connect with or get along with or understand her stepdaughters at all. So Sumi is sleeping through this abuse of Soo-yeon, but she wakes up and goes and finds Soo-yeon in the closet and pulls her out of the closet and is loving her and telling her she's so sorry. At which point the dad is burying the bird and sees the light on in Soo-yeon's room, and he comes up and confronts them. And finally Sumi is like, dude, you keep asking me to tell you what's going on, and you won't admit that you know what's going on. obviously your new wife is being terrible to Soo-yeon, and the dad looks very confused and finally says, "What are you talking about? Soo-yeon is dead." And when he says this, Soo-yeon starts backing away from Sumi, and Sumi turns to Soo-yeon, and the acting is brilliant, and says, "No, no, this can't be true." And Soo-yeon starts screaming because she's so shocked by the fact that she's dead. And we realize that the dad could never see Soo-yeon. It's always just been Sumi. Of the two daughters that were there, it's always just been Sumi in the house. And the moment on the porch where he talks to both of them, but the camera only shows him and Sumi, so much of it starts to make sense at that point. It is an incredible twist. It's if that was the only twist in the movie, it would have been more than enough. But this movie has quite a few twists, which I actually really like. But that's the first big one, and really probably my favorite twist in the movie. Incredible. I didn't see it coming at all. It was done so well. And this is where the movie goes just off the rails. It almost becomes absurd. The next morning, we see the stepmom pulling around this massive cloth bag that's tied with this rope and is bloody. And the stepmom is just dragging around this bag around the house, and then she goes and grabs this fireplace poker and starts beating this bag. And Sumi is running around the house trying to find Soo-yeon, and she sees this blood trail of where the stepmom dragged the bag, and she finds the bag and she's trying to open it and it moves. That's another scare. And eventually the stepmom and Sumi find each other and they confront each other and they get into a fight, and Sumi stabs the stepmom's hand with scissors, and it is just intense. One part of this that I really loved that I wanted to point out is that there's a point where Sumi finds the bag that obviously has her sister's dead body in it, and she's trying to open it and she can't untie the rope, so she goes to find a knife or whatever, and she's going through the kitchen, and there's this whole scene where she's wildly going through the kitchen trying to find some kind of implement to open this bag, and there are no knives, no scissors, nothing sharp in the kitchen. And I thought she's just released, of course, from a mental hospital. That attention to detail was really incredible. Anyway, while her and her stepmom are fighting, she has random flashes where there is blood on the floor, and then the blood on the floor disappears, and then she has a flash of her hitting the bag instead of the stepmom, and the dad left that morning to go pick somebody up, and he brings this somebody back, and it turns out to be the stepmother. And this is the second twist in the movie, and that is that Sumi has DID, dissociative identity disorder, and she has been herself and the stepmother the whole time. And this is the big final twist of the movie, and this is why this movie is so fun to watch a second time. Because when you go back and look at all these scenes and realize the only people in this house are Sumi and her dad, these scenes take on so much meaning. All the weird conversations, all the weirdness that seemed like it was just in the movie to be weird makes sense. The doubling of items makes sense. But when you look at scenes like the scene the stepmother was preparing for bed that I talked about earlier, and she hears her husband coming and jumps in bed and gets all like, she pretends like she's reading, and then the next scene he's lying beside her with his arm over her and slips his arm out and rolls over and gets out of bed and goes and sleeps somewhere else, you realize that scene occurred with his daughter. And that scene takes on so much more significance, and the weirdness of everything makes more sense. This young woman has been in this house for 3 days, melting down, and has to almost realize for the first time, realize that her sister is dead, and she's fighting this moment of guilt that is connected to her stepmother, and it's freaking incredible. The dinner scene where she's talking, the stepmother is sitting at the dinner table talking about all the memories she has of her and her brother as a kid, and the brother says, I don't remember any of that. You suddenly realize that they're sitting there having dinner with Sumi and her dad, not his sister. She is saying the most random things. This movie takes on an entirely new dimension when you watch it the second time, and it is incredible. It is so worth it. I love it. But the movie's not over there. She goes into the hospital. Her stepmother comes and sees her, and says, I hope everything's all right. She grabs the stepmother angrily and won't let her go. And then the stepmother goes back to the house by herself. And we get what I think is an actual moment of haunting. And the directors come out and said this as well. This movie does two things. It is a psychological thriller, and it is a ghost story, because the stepmom is haunted and I assume killed or terrified to death. I don't know if she even dies, but she is definitely confronted with the ghost of Soo-yeon. And that's when we realized that when I first watched it, I thought that Sumi had DID with 3 personalities, but she only has 2, her and her stepmom. Soo-yeon was a ghost that was with her in the house the whole time, and that adds another level to it that I really enjoy, a very supernatural level. Again, I'm just going to say this one more time. This movie warrants rewatches, and it's a movie that really pays off those rewatches. It's absolutely incredible, because the movie makes so much sense when you are able to know exactly what's going on through it at all times. The scary woman with the neck turns out to be their mother, and that's kind of the very end after the stepmom is confronted by Soo-yeon's ghost. We get the end, which is the explanation of everything that made all of this craziness go down. And when I was watching this movie with my friend Joo-hae, she said, oh, this, from here on out, this story at the end is the South Korean folk tale. And she had to give me a quick cultural note, and that is that in Korea, in these kind of traditional houses, they would entertain guests on the first floor, but the second floor was for family only. So there's this moment where the mother of these 2 girls is devastated. She's sick, but also her husband is having an affair on her with her nurse. So she hangs herself in the wardrobe, and Soo-yeon finds her and tries to pull her out, and the wardrobe drops on Soo-yeon, and she is suffocating under her mother's body in the wardrobe. And the stepmother, who's not the stepmother at this point, just a nurse, that the girls really hate because they know she's kind of moving in on her family, and that she's having an affair with their dad. She goes upstairs, goes into the room, sees Soo-yeon trapped under the wardrobe, and turns around and walks out of the room going to leave her. But she comes to the top of the stairs and realizes, my God, I can't do that. And she flips around and heads back into the room. And just as she's going into the room to save Soo-yeon, Sumi comes out of her room and says, what the hell are you doing up here? You're trying to take our mother's position. You're awful. I hate you, and get out of our lives. And the mother uses that moment of Soo-yeon dying while that's going on to punish Sumi, and says, "You're going to regret this moment of kicking me back downstairs. You're going to really regret this moment." And she says, "The only thing I regret is having to stand here with you." And Sumi leaves, and the stepmother watches her walk away while Soo-yeon dies under the wardrobe. It's a little bit extreme. I would say that in a weird twist of fate, that is the weakest part of this really great movie, is the inciting event. But that's the folktale. And folktales can be more extreme than stories nowadays, especially the further back you go. And I like this concept of forming this really incredible horror tale around this folktale center. It's really incredible. So in the end, the reasons you should watch this: incredible art, incredible acting. The setting is wonderful. The director of photography is wonderful. I'm not as good at the movies as Jason is. But to me, those are the things that really called to me. And the story itself is insanely good. And it's a movie that's not afraid to allow you to, or force you to be super confused almost your entire first watch through. And I like that. I like art that challenges us to go along for the ride. And trust that it will all make sense, and that trust is not unfounded in the end. It does all make sense, and it's absolutely incredible. It's my favorite. It's my favorite spooky season movie of all time. I watch it every year, and I absolutely love it. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of steal Jason's thunder once, talk about movies, just because I love this movie so much, and I feel like it's complex enough that I could give it a deep read like I do some of the more confusing books that I read. So there you go. My favorite horror movie, Tale of Two Sisters. I wanted to end really quick with just talking about, for a little bit, the American remake of this movie. So they remade this movie in America with Emily Browning and Elizabeth Banks, I think her name is, and then somebody else. And they did an interesting thing in that they called the movie The Uninvited, which is weird because I think there is another Asian horror film called The Uninvited that we enjoyed. And so it was weird to change the name from A Tale of Two Sisters to The Uninvited. But when I went to see this movie in theaters, I was excited to see an American redo of this, because I felt like, in the case, I mean, it's give or take. You never know what's going to happen with a remake. My kind of crazy take, and Jason disagrees with me, is I like the American Ring better than the Japanese Ring. I feel like that the Japanese Ring had great ideas, but was made on a very small budget, whereas the American Ring, I feel like the director added, Verbinski, I think his name is, added a level of artistic integrity to that film that was absolutely incredible. The Grudge, I felt like the Japanese one was better than the American one. I feel like the Japanese one was able to sit with its spooky scares, whereas the American one, I felt like, quickly would jump scare and flash away instead of building true creep. But that's something I can talk about later. But this one, I was hoping that it would go the way of The Ring, and that they would take this already incredible piece of art and make it even more artistic. And it went the opposite direction. The Uninvited is a run-of-the-mill horror film. It's not terrible. It's got a good twist. A different twist than this movie. And the only reason I talk about it is because I watched it again. I watched Tale of Two Sisters and that one again. And I didn't hate it as much as I did the time I watched it in the theater, just because I had to know that it wasn't Tale of Two Sisters at all. And when I just watched it as a regular horror movie, it was fine. It was a fine horror movie. There was nothing wrong with it. But it doesn't even add up anywhere near what this incredible South Korean film, Tale of Two Sisters, is. just not even close. I don't know why they remade it if they weren't going to give it the same artistic brilliance of this film. It's too bad. It was a remake we didn't need in the long run, in my opinion. We really didn't need it. All right, that's all I've got. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked it, please click like. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe because we'll be making a lot more of it in the future. And thank you so much for watching.